another episode of Emerald Echo, a Green Lantern podcast. As always, I'm your host, Adam. And with me is my co-host, Donnie, the Emerald enthusiast himself. Donnie, how's it going?
What's up, Lantern fans? It's the podcasting machine, the big nerd in green, the man whose ring runs on fanboy energy, and it never goes dark. It is the Emerald enthusiast.
That was quite something. Now, your fanboy energy never goes dark even when you sleep?
Absolutely not. I just glow all night long.
All right, okay. I'm sure that's very very nice for your wife. She's a glowing green entity just as she's trying to sleep. But yeah, no, it's cool. I don't know what happens when I sleep other than I probably snore, so I can't help you there either. If I'm glowing, it's probably a blue kind of mix between blue lanterns and leaf colors, although I'd fail as a blue lantern right now because not much hope where the leaves are concerned.
Just like St. Walker's ring, just kind of hovering right here.
Yeah.
Hopeless, you know.
Black Hand came and got the Leafs in Game 7. That's for sure. But anyway, I know the hero there. The last episode, we were lucky enough to have Jeffrey Thorne, who is currently writing the Green Lantern comic book series. It's been tremendously received. A lot of you enjoyed it. And so we thank you for watching. And we are happy to say that looks like we're going to have Jeffrey back on after the next few issues of the Green Lantern series come out, and we'll have another post game State of the Union, whatever you want to call it, on the issues themselves. But the purpose of today's episode is to review the latest issue of Jeffrey Thorne story, which is Green Lantern number 3. So, Donnie, give us a little bit of info.
Before we do that, I do want to mention just briefly here, short film by some fans, an actor by the name of BZ Cullens, who you will know from the short film In Brightest Day, is now putting out a sequel called In Blackest Night Out. And we will put the link information in the description below, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the future, but check that out. BZ is a very nice guy, very talented actor, and it looks like he has even more people lined up this time, more talent to play the Green Lantern characters that you know and love.
All right, cool. I will check that out, of course.
And they dedicated these films to the memory of Dwayne McDuffie, by the way. So I think that's admirable as well. So
yes, indeed. So yeah, definitely be on the lookout for that, and I'll check them out as well. And we could definitely discuss both of them in a later episode. Mm-hmm. But as it pertains to issue 3, rather, give us the rest of the creative team and a little bit of where we left off and what happens.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to do my best as always. I'm sorry if I mangle your name.
You know, I like doing this to you.
Yeah, yeah, you like that. You're sadistic, man. So we have, of course, Jeffrey Thorne, Tom Rainey, Marco Santucci, Michael Atiyah, Rob Lay, Bernard Chang, Alex Sinclair. They're on the covers. Brian Hitch and Alex Sinclair with the variant covers. Bixie Mathau, Mike Cotton, and James S. Rich. This is the entire creative team. Fantastic. If I mangled your name, just tell me how to pronounce it correctly.
And I'm sure you bought all the variants, correct, Donnie?
There was only 2, and yes, I did.
Oh, yeah. Good. I'm glad I know you so well now, Donnie, that I could just, and know that you went ahead and bought both covers. But yeah, so where do we leave off and what's going on?
Well, where we left off was the Quest Lanterns going through the barrier, and we saw at the end of the previous issue, of course, that the battery was destroyed. And this story called Cosmology Lesson deals with the after effects of the battery just being absolutely decimated.
Right.
So this story opens, interestingly enough, it opens up with John and the other lanterns looking like they're in a high school story. They're all yeah. Yeah, they're all sitting in class, and it's really interesting. I've had this dream before, or dreams like this, where I'm back in school, and John, and he starts to realize, as I have done too, he sees people from different times in his life, and he knows something's not right here. This is not how it happened. So yeah, he has this dream about high school. There's a bunch of lanterns in it. There's Savfk, there's Kilowog, and we're introduced to.
I love Kilowog as the class bully. That was
as the class. Yeah, great art here from Tom Rainey, especially when it comes to these scenes. But we see the ship that we saw in issue 2. Okay, we see the remnants of that, and we see that the lanterns are building a sector house, which I think they call it the lighthouse at one point.
Yeah.
But we see a bunch of the lanterns that went through with him, including Ken's, who's the new character that we saw. We saw her in Future State, and it's interesting there. All the lanterns are in space, and of course we see what we knew what was going to happen, and that is the rings being depowered at terrible times for all these lanterns.
Yes.
And that, I've got to say, now, as much as I knew it was coming, I think my favorite panel in this was John, and it's like the title page right above the one that says Cosmology Lesson. John kind of gripping at his chest and throat because his ring's been depowered. And remember, the lantern's rings sustain their life. So a human being in space not going to survive. And John realizes,
yeah, it's not going to end well. If you don't
he is seconds away from death. And I think that was my favorite panel in this because
it was very striking. Yeah,
Tom Rainey was really able to bring out the horror of having that happen, being in deep space, and all of a sudden you can't breathe.
I agree. Yeah.
We saw a similar scene in Injustice where Sinestro pulls off his entire finger, and when he loses the ring, of course, he can no longer breathe in space.
Yeah.
Now the difference here is John actually does make it through. Now we knew he was going to survive somehow, but I really like how this was done. Amanita, who is a lantern that we saw, this was pre-Emerald Twilight Volume 3. This is a mushroom-type alien. And I confirmed this with Jeffrey Thorne. I asked him, did Amanita actually sacrifice himself? And he said yes. What we saw was Amanita explode into spores and form a life-sustaining cocoon around John Stewart. So Amanita's gone. Now I was wondering if that would happen because Amanita, if I remember correctly from Volume 3, we learned that Amanita was actually very, very old. I think at one point, even he said he was older than the Guardians or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I was like, maybe it's a Groot scenario where, the spores come back together or whatever.
It was a very Groot move to do that.
Yeah. But that
is inner Groot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But no, that is not the case. Jeffrey said that Amanita is gone. So, yeah. Yeah. So we see, John, interesting here, we see that
Amanita's gone forever from the first spore to the last.
Yeah, so we see an interesting scenario here. John all of a sudden on the beach with Katma Tui. So now obviously something is very odd here.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because obviously, we know Katma Tui's gone. That's a very different time in John's history. And John's looking around, and of course he's enjoying being with Katma. Who wouldn't be?
Yeah, I can't blame him there.
Yeah, but then we see that John realizes he grabs her and says, "You're not my wife. This isn't right." And then we see John finally come to it in reality, and he's on a planet called Sergilon. And we're introduced to Sakari and her daughter. It's either Elo or Ilo. I'm going to say Ilo because
I say Ilo because that's what's spelled.
Well, yeah, well, it's anyway. So I thought Ilo, Elo. I was thinking Milo, so maybe it's Ilo. Anyway, so that's why you That's why you tune into the Emerald Echo is for lessons in phonetics and things like that. So yeah. Anyway, so we see Sakari.
And next to the alphabet would be J-Lo, but that's neither here.
So we see John awaken, and Sakari is the one who has rescued him and has sustained him on this planet. It's interesting to note when you see him wake up, one of the first things you notice, he has a full beard and his hair is a little longer, a little shaggier than we're used to seeing with Jon Stewart. So you get a clue right away. Some time has passed.
We're starting to get a sense, because remember when Jeffrey was here last episode where he said, the events that we saw in Future State could still play out, but differently, because things have changed. Well, we're in a different scenario, but you can kind of see the story evolving into a similar path with the way John looks. And the planet they're on looks very similar to the locales of Future State kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Now, one of the things that really seems to be a big deal in this issue, and I'm not saying that I have all the answers here because I don't think Jeffrey Thorne intends for us to have all the answers here yet.
Right.
We see that Sakari talks about the events on Sergilon in terms of like centuries. She recounts all these events that take years and decades, and John's like, this can't be right because the barrier only went up a few weeks ago. How are you saying that all this history happened when it can't have been that old? What I'm wondering now is, you remember that Jeffrey Thorne said that John's story in Future State took place 14 years in the future. Is John in some kind of accelerated timeline now where the other lanterns aren't, where they're in a scenario where a few months have passed? Let's see, it says 145 days pass. But does John end up in a scenario where he's kind of vaulted forward in an accelerated timeline, whereas outside the barrier, time is running differently?
Interesting. Yeah, I could see that. I don't know if that's where Jeff is going, but I could see that. Because there was that confusion. Where it's like, even I was like, wait a minute, how can it happen that long ago for her, those events, but for doesn't make logical sense, right?
Right, and she
and
mentioned,
they even and that's not an insult to Jeff. They even call that out in the issue.
No, I don't think he means for us to have all the answers at this point.
Yeah.
Sakari doesn't know who the Guardians are. Like, John mentions them, and she's like, "Who are the Guardians?"
Well, isn't this place is part of the uncharted territory, right? So
the dark sectors, yes.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So the fact that she wouldn't know who the Guardians is makes sense. And not knowing certain things would also make sense from a Guardian point of view, because if these are really dark sectors.
Well, and that's another question that has yet to be answered. Where are the Guardians? Did some people...
according to the Joker in 1989, they're at home washing their tights, but I don't know.
But, were they destroyed on Oa? I don't know. That doesn't seem likely that all the Guardians would get taken out by the battery exploding.
Listen, I'm not taking anything for granted now, because Jeff keeps saying no one's safe. So
yeah,
maybe the Guardians.
It could be. We don't.
I don't think they're dead, but or not all of them anyway.
Yeah, we don't get the answer to that question here.
Yeah.
So again, we don't have the answer to that. John seems to be in some kind of timeline with in this barrier here that, yeah, I don't know. There doesn't seem to be any type of long range communication here. So we don't see any other lanterns, at least in John's part of the story. Now there's a second part of the story. We don't see any other lanterns communicate with John to tell him what's going on. What we eventually see after John, he spends time, getting to know Sakari and Ilo, the Quinuri, excuse me. They show up, and it's interesting. I have to ask, I was like, how did the Quinuri get in this barrier? How did they have access here? And so I still think that something is related to that attack on the Guardian. There's got to be more forces at play here, I think, than just the magic wielders from the gem world. And I'm not saying that I have all the answers here, but I think this is bigger than just those two events that we saw initially.
I would concur with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so now what's really cool is John goes to confront the Quinuri, and he is wearing this jacket that he got made for him by Sakari and Ilo, and this is a cool looking jacket. It's a cool looking Green Lantern, kind of a custom uniform that he's wearing.
It would almost be like, when I saw it, I'm like, okay, so this is kind of like John Stewart channeling his inner Guy Gardner.
Yeah.
Right? Now, when I saw it, I'm like, okay, I have two questions. One, would Donnie buy a replica of this jacket? Which my personal answer to that question would be yes. And two, how badly does Donnie want an action figure of this particular version of John Stewart?
Donnie was just getting ready to say that. Who would buy an action figure of this? This guy. I'd buy 2 or 3, actually. So
of course you would, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd steal one of those 3, but I digress. Yeah.
But so we see, though, that John he's kind of overwhelmed by the Quinuri, and it's some kind of electrocution here, so he doesn't make it very far, and we see him kind of falling out of the sky, and then the Quinuri leader saying, okay, go get me that ring. So John's in a bad way when this part of the story ends.
Absolutely. It's funny because when John goes out there all confident and heroically, you think, all right, we're getting, because we're getting, he's going to have a big, a big moment. This is kind of like his, his time to shine, and then he ends up getting just decimated in that moment. And again, the striking visual, like we've seen, I'm fairly certain John Stewart's not going to die in this run because he's the centerpiece. But as Jeffrey Thorne alluded to, because he loves the character, he's going to put him through his paces, and you definitely see that in this issue, with almost choking to death in space, at the beginning of the issue, and then here now getting electrocuted and sort of taken out.
Yeah.
And it's funny when it says next issue, and it kind of gives an allusion to. I almost thought that was the end. I'm like, oh, okay, the issue's over, and then I realized it wasn't. Like, okay, there's more.
Yeah. So we also got an answer to, and I want to say, I like the way Jeff handled the questions of how does John survive without his ring. You saw that that Sakari was like a chemopath, and Jeff said that this is actually a nod to Star Trek. The spiny things or whatever that she had hooked into John, it was probing his mind, giving him a little bit of history, and I think she said other things, basically, I guess, acclimating his body to his new environment.
Yes.
But the story didn't get bogged down in that, like trying to...
No, it was very Star Trek, and I liked it, because I'm a Star Trek fan, so, if Jeff wants to keep putting in some Star Trek references, sign me up for that.
Yeah. So that's how he survives. Is she helps him survive, but
Yes.
he didn't bog the story down trying to tell every little intricate detail that would have been like a slog to try to get through. So
right. No, I liked it was just the right amount, and I liked the interaction between John and Ilo, like the kid.
yes.
You can see, and I think that in part, you can see his interactions with Kelly maybe have affected him, and sort of he's getting better with kids.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Yeah.
Now, so you know me, I'm not Mr. Fan of shipping or mushy stuff in these books. But could you see something developing romantically between John and
Sakari?
Yeah.
It could be. It's too early on to like speculate on that. I think it's hard, but they've obviously spent a lot of time.
I'd really like to incorporate, John and Sakari forever from the first telepathic link up to the last. I'd really like to incorporate that.
Okay, so what mashup name would they go?
Okay, so we got John and what's the Sakari?
Sakari, yeah.
John Kari.
Yeah. No. See.
I don't know how these kids do this shit.
Stu Ari?
Yeah.
I don't
could be it. Could be it, yeah. Come on, Jeff. Which one you like? Which of those two you like? Tell us. Come on. Use it in one of the books. Come on, Jeff. Hey, you know you want to. You want to placate the Tumblr crowd. Come on.
Yeah. But again, that's how the issue ends, is John trying to stop the Quinuri, and...
Well, it doesn't really end like that. There's more
to
it.
His story, not the
John's
issue.
Portion,
yeah. As far as the second story, the second part of the story at least, we finally get some answers as to how certain lanterns are doing. Okay, Jo Mullane, she's back on Oa. She's now in kind of this like diplomatic role because she's the last lantern standing. This is tough for her. We see Izamat Cole, who I'm going to guess, and again, this is my speculation. Don't take this as gospel, but Izamat Cole, I think, seems to be dead. He's floating in space. Maybe the pack that he has on is sustaining him. I'm not sure, but he's not moving.
Yeah.
We see Princess Iolande on a planet where she is fighting some creatures, so she's alive, but in a bad way. Kyle, as you remember from the last issue, he was depowered out in space, but there were like some astronaut type of beings around him.
Yeah.
They seem to have taken him into a ship, but whether that's for good or for bad, we don't know yet. He's hooked up to some kind of machine that seems to suggest that he's alive, and that's what Jeff said, that most of the at least probably all of the human titular lanterns will survive in some form. So
you're really clinging to that, aren't you?
Well, I think it makes sense that he
Listen,
has. Yeah.
Jeff, do us a favor. We can't take any more heartache. The Leafs lost. We're in a state of sadness already. Don't just belay any plans for Kyle. Negative plans for a good 6 or 7 months, please. Let's process this.
Well, he did suggest that there's some big plans for Kyle that come up, and some of like my favorite stories with Kyle is when he's been in a bad way. When he was, for a while he was parallaxed. We saw him tortured at one point.
Yeah.
If it's a good story, Kyle doesn't have to win out every single time. So,
well, if it's anything like the DC poll,
he didn't win.
It'll be. I mean, really. Real quick side note. Green Lantern. What was the series meant to be called?
Underworld on Fire.
Green Lantern Underworld on Fire, essentially, unfortunately, had the same kind of run the Leafs had in the Stanley Cup playoffs. It started out great, looked promising, looked like we were going to move to the next round, and then shenanigans happened.
Green Lantern actually advanced a couple rounds though. It's got a little bit better track record than the Leafs. Yeah,
damn it, everything. Well, what doesn't have better track record than the Leafs? Anyway, continue.
Before I get off this like part of the story here,
yeah.
Rotlop Fan also alive on a raft on some planet where he's, again, on a raft in the middle of the ocean on this planet. Sure. Arija Rab, in a very bad way, out in space,
floating,
a depowered ring. Now, will her alien physiology save her? I don't know. It's not looking good for her, though. So,
yeah, I mean, there's a couple that are in perilous positions. Some are seemingly dead. Others, are on near the end. Really, I think now when Jeff says nobody's safe, we should start probably believing it.
Yeah. So that is as far as, well, there's a couple of more lanterns that we'll talk about here.
Right.
But we see that, Sojourner Mullane is working with, counselors from the United Federation of Planets to try to find out what happened, to try to locate the other lanterns. She's struggling here, obviously, in this role.
But it's funny because, it's interesting. Her being the sort of the ambassador now for the Green Lantern, the representative, it mirrors her, the role she had in Far Sector to a degree. She kind of did a similar thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, she learned about, the kind of, the politics of, being a Green Lantern in this kind of scenario.
Yeah.
So now she is in somewhat of a similar scenario now. Yeah. However, we do learn the fate of another Lantern, and that is Simon Baz. Now, as you remember, last issue...
Oh, Phil Bobo's favorite. Yeah.
I knew you were going to say that. Simon was injured, and he was on the ground when we saw him last. Kelly Quintella had shielded him using her gauntlet, but it looked like maybe his ring had exploded. There was blood all over him. He did survive. His arm has taken some damage. So what he has now is he has been healed with a cybernetic cast that goes over the arm. And it has an interesting function. It kind of reminds me of Hordak, where it can form its own weapons. And you see him form this blaster, this huge gun out of it. And so we see him and Sojourner talking, and he makes an interesting comment, Simon does. Simon, when he first broke onto the scene, he carried a gun with him. And eventually Batman got him to forego that. He was like, that's kind of the feral part of yourself. But here we see Simon say, I always knew my ring would fail me. So we see that he was kind of two minds about that. Yes, he wanted to put away the gun, but there was part of him that was doubting whether the ring would always be there for him.
Right.
So we see him make a gun here. And it's just an interesting character development that we see there.
But I think he's in a different place where his first reaction is not, let me get my gun out.
Mm-hmm. Well, here he obviously, they are severely undermanned here, the Green Lanterns, with just Joe and Kelly Quintella on Oa. That's it. We do see another Lantern later on. I'll get to that. But we also see that Kelly sees Simon. And
just before you get to that, I like Joe trying to relate to her and trying to get her to open up.
Yeah.
And how she was in a state where she wasn't talking, and that made a lot of sense because when you go through something that traumatic, you can't just carry on like nothing happened.
Well, remember Jeffrey Thorne likened it to a kid going through 9/11.
Yeah.
Now that is a powerful image there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But she's overjoyed that Simon's alive.
Right.
Yeah.
And like I said last week, or last episode, I really like that big brother, little sister dynamic they got going on. And so that moment was nice. It was very touching to see. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, after the cataclysm, it's nice to have, a
small respite. Yeah,
a small respite. That's a good way to put it. A small respite, a moment of hope, as the Lanterns are kind of sifting through all this carnage. So this issue, this story, ends with, the calls are going out to any surviving Lanterns.
Right.
And we see, now we already knew this from Future State, but we see what looks like the Hall of Justice, Hal Jordan, his ring's still functioning, and we know now, we remember Cyborg built him some sort of device. I don't think they ever fleshed it out. Some sort of device that kind of amplifies the remaining energy in his ring, and he constructs that chip and goes to Oa. Right. That seems to be the moment that he is in now, that he knows there has been some awful event and he's got to get to Oa. So Hal's alive, Hal's got his ring, and that should be the next step here. It says the next issue, suspects. So
there's going to be some interrogation and detective work going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Jo is going to be at the center of that because, I mean, that's her bread and butter. So,
well, she's got a lot of investigating to do because, like I said, I really like that Jeffrey Thorne is setting up so many different story threads where you don't have all the answers yet, and it could really go so many ways.
Yeah, it's very unpredictable, and I like the structure of the book too because, you know, with John's storyline, Joe's storyline, it very much feels like a television series in structure and stuff like that. I'm digging it. So you can kind of tell, you know, Jeff's other writing, you know, seeping, you know, that kind of structure seeping into this, and I really think it works. In so far here, I'm liking it. I'm loving it.
I also need to point out here in the book, DC Pride #1. This is a special that is coming out. Alan Scott has a story in this.
Okay.
So for Green Lantern fans, DC Pride #1 coming out this month. So
we have to schedule a special Alan Scott episode to talk more about the casting, but also, you know, his you know, pick 3 or 4 of his classic appearances or and read them. So we'll have to schedule that at some point for sure. But yeah, so but I guess we can go ahead and rate the issue.
Mm-hmm.
So remember, we do 5 for story and 5 for art. So
yeah. Or you mean we rate? Yeah. Okay. So well, actually, let me say this, because there's 2 distinct parts to this story. The first one, I'm going to give the writing a 5 and the art a 4.5. The only criticism I have, and I'm sorry, Tom, if you're watching this, there were a couple of times that the expressions were a little questionable. Like there was, you know, when John is having that dream where Sakari has like the Abdul the Butcher eyes, and I'm like, wait a minute, she has like a reaction here, like she's an evil character, but she's not, as far as we know. So I'm going to give the art a 4.5 there, writing a 5. As far as the Joe story, that's the Santucci part. I'm going to give the writing a 5 there and the art a 5 there too. So,
yeah, for me, stories for the first part, John's story. That sounds like a story in itself, but for John's story, is going to get a 5. And the art by Tom Rainey, I'm going to say, yeah, I'll get a 4.5 as well. I see what you're saying in regarding the issue you have with it. It's still fantastic work.
Yeah.
Especially the stuff where they're out in space. I really, you know, and the image of him, you know, gasping for air. That was really shocking. So, still great work. For Joe's story and the Marco Santucci stuff, again, the writing is a 5, the story is a 5, and the art's a 5. Marco Santucci is quickly becoming one of my favorite current artists.
Let me see if I can get a good shot of this here.
That's terrifying. That's almost like body horror.
I mean, for this issue, for this alone, this panel alone, you should buy this issue. So, you know, This moment was just amazing. And again, the sacrifice of Amanita, I just really liked how John survived. So
yeah, agreed.
So it looks like we have come to the end here, sir.
We have, and but the good news is, just because the show's over, the conversation can continue. So Donnie, where can our viewers, listeners, whatever, get in touch with you and continue the Green Lantern discussion?
You can find me on Twitter as the Emerald Enthusiast. Let's talk wrestling. Let's talk comics. Let's talk collectibles. Let's talk Green Lantern.
Sounds like a plan. And if you want to talk comics, superheroes, wrestling, whatever you want to talk about, we can do that at Adam_LeafSfan on Twitter. The show, the podcast network Twitter account is at MMNPDC. We have a Facebook group, which the links are below. Click it, I will add you, and we can continue the conversation there. But until next time, remember that the Green Lanterns are forever. From the first time that Jeffrey Thorne puts John Stewart in peril to the last. So long, everybody.
So long, everyone.